Hello, my friend. On today's episode, I'm having back on the podcast John Franklin, who is a co-founder of Kilo, and he is here today to share all of his wisdom about selling your gym. So if you ever thought about the possibility of selling your gym and you're not sure what the right timing is or if you want to do it, or you already know you want to sell your gym, but you're not exactly sure how to value your gym and get the most money from your transaction, this is a great episode for you. I'll also say that even if you plan to never sell your gym, you're going to die as a gym owner, this is still a great episode for you because all the tips and advice John gives in this episode are really about strategically improving your gym's operations. And so even if you don't plan on selling your gym, this is a great episode for you. Grab a pen and paper because he covers a lot of ground pretty quickly, and let's dive in. Hello, fitness business nerds. What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business of Unicorns podcast. Before we jump into with today's guest, which I'm very excited about, I just want to give a quick shout out to our friends at Kilo who are on today's podcast, because Kilo is a fantastic kind of all-in-one solution for your website, for marketing automation, for your booking and billing platform. They really do it all. And so many of our Unicorn Side members have switched to Kilo over the last year and are really loving their experience. So if you want a place that will build your website, integrate marketing automations, and everything you need to run a successful gym, go over to our friends' website, link down below in the show notes, which is appropriate for today because founder of Kilo is here, Mr. John Franklin, back on the podcast for, I don't know, third or fourth time. Welcome back, my friend.
Just can't get enough,
It just, the fun never stops. Well, listen, it's not for nothing that you've been one of our most frequent podcast guests, just because you got a lot of wisdom in that noggin of yours, my friend. And today is no exception because we're going to be talking all about how and when to sell your gym, how to know when that time is coming, how to strategically prepare for it, get the most money from that transaction. And so just thanks for being back on the podcast and being willing to share everything you know with us. It's so appreciated, and our listeners always really value your episodes.
XOXOXO, man, I am happy to get into this topic. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, well, let's just talk a little bit about, so people who don't maybe know your full backgrounds, a little bit about your personal experience with selling gyms, just like the 5,000 foot 2-minute version of what do you know about this topic from personal experience?
Yeah, so I opened my first gym in 2013 in Hoboken, New Jersey, and just happened to time the CrossFit trend perfectly. So if you are unfamiliar with CrossFit, this was a moment in time where you could just open your doors and people would be waving money at you, even if you had no clue what you're doing, which I did not. And so I opened my first gym with about 120 members and was at capacity 2 months later. If you operate in the New York City area, which a lot of your listeners do, you just can't knock a wall down and expand when you're full. So I used the cash flow from the first one to open a second one in New York. At that time, that was when you could get leads on Facebook for 25 cents or something insane. Got 5,000 people on a list and did a big pre-sale and opened the door with 220 members. And I pre-sold 6 and 12 month memberships. So, over $225,000 in cash collected before we even opened. No one had set foot in the gym. So just insane luck. If you copied the exact same thing I did today, it would be nowhere near those numbers. Ended up getting some more opportunities as time went on. Had 4 gyms that were profitable and a dog gym, a 5th gym that we can talk about over beers one day. At around the time Kilo was getting started, there was a bunch of new opportunities coming my way. Had decided it was time to sell. That process ended up taking 18 months, and I learned a lot about gym valuations, mistakes to make, things I would have done differently, and created this framework for other gym owners in which I will share with them.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks for the story. I think it's, even though I've heard your background before and knew you through some of it, it's still amazing to remember what that wave was like, both for CrossFits and for lead gens on Facebook. It really was a time that no longer exists. That is kind of fun to be nostalgic about, and also a little sad.
Glory days.
Yeah. So obviously your decision to sell came from just emerging opportunities in your life and your career. But for those listeners who are not sure if it's time to sell, what are some thoughts about how and when to make that decision? What are some things that you think would be helpful?
So I always like to say, the strategies I'll give you will make your business more valuable.
Hmm.
And typically, businesses that are more valuable are ones that produce more cash flow and are easier to run. So even if you're like a never sell, I'm going to die with my gym, uh, it's still useful to want to implement some of these things because it's going to make your business easier to run. And so I had talked to a group of gym owners earlier about this topic, and a couple of people raised their hands like, yeah, this hit me at the right time. I'm never going to sell my gym, but if I get hit by a bus, like I want
Hmm.
my family to know what to do. I want my wife to be able to not have to deal with this. So some considerations for some of you who are like, I will die with my gym. So in terms of when to sell, you want to, like, I have a framework because a lot of times when people think about selling their gym, it's usually something terrible goes wrong
Sure.
and they're like, burn it all to the ground, and they end up giving it away or worse, just shutting it down. So,
Yeah.
if you've been working in your business for 5, 10 years, the last thing you want to do is just hand the keys to someone and have nothing to show for it at the end, right? Because you put a lot of work into it, you should get some money out of it. So I have 3 steps that I like to say. So the first one is, if you're thinking about selling, the best thing you can do is remove yourself completely from the gym. So
Hmm.
meaning, have a operator in place that starts acting like an owner. I went extreme. I literally moved to a different country. So I moved to Canada to get away from my gyms to make sure they ran quote unquote by themselves. I know another person who's running a bunch of metabolic franchises from the Cayman Islands, and he owns
Hmm.
like 4 or 5 of them now. So that is step one. Step two is, if you are selling because you want to pursue another opportunity, I always like to say your side project income should exceed your gym income. So I was doing marketing work on the side, and that ended up growing past the point of what I was making from the gyms.
Hmm.
So I de-risked it. I've seen a lot of people sell, go chase the next thing, realize they hate the next thing, or can't make the
Yeah.
next thing work, and then they lost their golden goose. Because
Yep.
like I said, when I started, I got lucky. Like, if I opened the same gym in the same location, the same time, I don't think I would be able to build up anywhere near as fast as I did. Like, sometimes gyms work in certain locations. I know you, as a once multi-location operator, know that you can have the same team in the same location,
Yes.
the same type of magic, but one will work gangbusters and one will just be an absolute dog. And who knows why.
Of
Now,
course.
and then finally, this is for you, Michael. It's the third step. Which do you enjoy more? Like this new opportunity. Like, is it going to be more in line with your lifestyle, what you want, right? Like,
Yeah.
I work in a shed in my back office where I am now. There are things that I miss about owning a
Hmm.
gym, that community, seeing people every day, like working in person with staff, making like huge lifestyle changes for someone where you can get those "you changed my life" type situations where you don't necessarily get that with gym management software. Not a lot of gym
Yeah.
owners come to you crying because they can now run around with their children or something like that.
Totally. Though they should, because they are saving a lot of time. But I think there's a great 3 steps. Let's just go back to the first one, because I want to make sure people really understand why the first one's important. So the first one was get the gym running without you, and this really matters for a lot of reasons. You just want to peel back the onion here and say, why does the gym need to run without them before they sell it?
I mean, let's talk about the reality, and that's that most gyms will sell to 1 to 4 times seller discretionary earnings, net owner benefit, profit plus owner add backs, however you want to call it. It's basically
Hmm.
the money an owner can take out of the gym.
Yep.
And so, aside from profit, the number one determinant of whether you'll be on the low side or the high side of that is if you have an operator in place, because someone buying a business doesn't want to buy a job.
Yep. Yeah. And I think it really also shows a potential buyer that you have systems in place that doesn't require you and your like unique magic, right? I think that idea of like that kind of key man risk is so real in our business, because so many times gyms are really powered by kind of one charismatic, super connected person who has relationships with every client. And if that's the case, that's just like, that's unsellable to a buyer, right? If you have to stay with it for it to survive, that's tough for someone else to want to take over. But if you can put systems in place and people in place that have clear roles, responsibilities, and can deliver all the outcomes without you, then it's much more sellable, much more sellable. Yeah. And I think your second tip there, I think is really also really valuable, which is go start investing your time and energy in something else to see if you like it. Because I think you're
Right.
right. I've heard so many stories of folks who left their gym and sold it, and in part because maybe they're a little frustrated or burnt out, but then they go and try and do this next thing that they thought was going to be much more relaxing or fun or lucrative, and they're like, oh fuck, like this is actually worse. So I think going to invest in your next chapter before you sell, I think is really critical. I love that one.
And you and Mark are perfect examples, right?
Yeah.
Like you guys had an extremely profitable gym and you tried another gym. You did some stuff online. I believe you guys were real estate moguls or still are real estate moguls. And then you
Yes.
started doing the time
Yes.
consulting, and then you finally landed on business for unicorns. And, it seems like
Yep.
that's going incredibly well now.
100%. Yeah. And
And,
we've been following your steps before we knew them, which was, is testing other things. And, I'm not sure if we'll sell or not. Right. But the idea that MFF can really run pretty well without us has been proven now for a few years, which is fantastic. It just gives us more options in our life. All right. So now we've covered a little bit about how people make the decision, what the process is, which I think is incredibly useful. Let's talk a little bit about valuation, because people get hung up here. There's a lot of models people can find online if they Google how to value a gym. But I think you've already always taken an approach to this, which to me is very simple, very accessible, and effective, because it's worked for you and others many times. So just kind of walk through, what's my gym worth?
so your gym's worth whatever someone will pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, having sold 5 of them now, valuation is a lot more art than science.
Sure.
But the best thing you can do as someone selling a business is have a compelling narrative to justify the valuation
Mm-hmm.
of your business. Now, I'm going to oversimplify here, just to get you guys in the right headspace. I said the gym is worth 1 to 4 times, we'll call it net owner benefit, which is the money you take out of the business. Now, gyms sell for 1 to 4 times that, 1 to 4 times that number. So if you take out 100,000, your gym's worth somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 400,000. And I say there's 4 drivers of whether you're on the low end or the high end of that.
Mm-hmm.
The first one's profitability. The second one's predictability.
Mm-hmm.
The third one is staff. And the fourth one is systems. And we can go into each of those really quickly if you want to, or I can give you the benchmarks for each one and we can move on with
let's
our
dive
lives.
in. Let's dive in. We have time.
Okay. So profitability is the number one thing that dictates value. Like we said, we want, buyers want to buy a business, not a job. Yeah. And so I think the goal for everyone listening to this is to get to 100,000 in net owner benefit with professional management in place.
Yeah.
That is,
and it's really critical, right? Because that means, because me as an owner, I don't have to come in and have a job, right? You said this before, but people don't want to buy a job, they want to buy a business. So if you are already generating enough profit to put in my pockets, that's exciting. And I don't have to go and work every day because you already have staff, which we're going to talk about in a second. Then it's become so much more of a sexy narrative for someone that they're really buying profit on day one instead of buying a job. So I think that profitability, you're right, is crucial.
And I will say something that I see very commonly in super profitable gyms, with like the owner's name on the door, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't treat your gym like a piggy bank. So we're getting towards the end of the year. A lot of people like to, quote unquote, spend money to save on taxes.
Yep.
And while I'm all about mitigating your tax load, like I moved to Florida for family and tax reasons, like don't buy stupid shit to save, like don't spend $1 to save 35 cents, because when you go to sell, like let's say you spend $10,000 on something you don't need to quote unquote save on taxes, there's an extra 6,500 out of your bank account once you've paid taxes. So you're down 6,500. And then again, we said businesses trade at 1 to 4 times net owner benefit. So that $10,000 missing from the bottom line means that your business is worth $10,000 to $40,000 less than it otherwise would have been.
Yeah, great point.
So you and I love that Greg Crabtree book, Simple Numbers.
Yes.
Mark does. I don't know if you like it too.
Yeah, I do.
But he says the number one business KPI is how big of a check did you write to the IRS this year? And there's a subquote saying you can't build legitimate wealth from an operating business unless you pay taxes. So
Yeah.
we'll leave it there.
Sure. Great. So that was the first pillar, profit. The second one is
predictability.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I got absolutely destroyed on some of these predictability ones, and these are things that you probably gloss over. So let's listen, guys. So the first one's consistent top and bottom line. So over the previous 3 years, you want to show a consistent top line, even better if it's growing. Same with the bottom line. If your revenue numbers look like, 3 years ago was $1 million, and then it was 700,000, then it was 850, a buyer's going to look at that and be like, this is unpredictable. Like, I don't know what I'm getting here. So that's the easy one. The next one is low churn. So churn dictates basically how good a service is and how
lifetime value.
sticky it is,
Yeah.
And so that, that's why SaaS companies trade for such high multiples. Like the churn's typically pretty low. If you are a mind body customer, that, it's like they can keep raising the prices and not necessarily release the most new features, and you stay because it's just kind of a pain in the butt to switch.
Exactly.
And so, with a gym, it's a little tougher to keep those people that sticky. And that's something that any savvy buyer is going to look at. Next piece, contracts. It does offer reliability, but if you have low churn, that's going to trump your contracts. The next is a long-term lease with options to renew. So I got dinged on this pretty hard because I had a relatively short-term lease. The landlord didn't want to sign a long-term lease because they wanted to develop the building. And so, the buyer didn't have confidence that they could operate out of that space for the next 10 years. So you're going to get really kicked in the shin on the valuation there. So, I highly recommend you get like at least 3 to 4 or 5 year options on the end of a lease if your plan is ever to sell. And then make sure your lease has change in control language, meaning that you can sell your gym and your landlord can't, veto it essentially. And you want to have an assignment clause, meaning you can assign the lease to a new buyer so the buyer doesn't have to go and negotiate a new lease with the landlord. So double check those.
Yeah,
And
those
then,
are huge because if you don't have that, you can really blow up a deal, right? If the landlord decides, oh no, I'm going to treat this new person that you're selling your gym to like a brand new person, I'm going to start negotiating with them and get your rate up to market rate. I mean, that can really just harpoon a deal. So I think that's really crucial. Yeah. Sorry, keep on going. I interrupted.
No. And another one, especially for tier 1 cities, make sure you have your certificate of occupancy and all your permits are closed out. So as a fellow New York City gym owner, Michael, you've probably gotten a PCE before, which is this, I don't know if it's even still required. I know they were getting rid of it.
They changed the laws a few years ago, but I'm not sure what the current state is, but I hope it's gone.
It used to take, it's this obscure permit that shows that your gym is not a brothel. And it takes somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 12 months to get it, and anywhere between $75,000 to $150,000 to get it. Most gyms just start operating without it, and then some never get it, and some actually go through with it. I went through a couple phases, and then the gym got busy. I never got it. Then when it became time to sell, came up that didn't have a PCE, so the buyer had to spend $50,000 to get a PCE. There was issues with the landlord in the lease transaction, and I ended up having to put, I think, $85,000 of the sale in escrow, and I didn't get that money for almost a year afterwards until the gym got its operating certificate of occupancy. So if you're someone who maybe cut some corners to save a little money to not get a clean certificate of occupancy, or you have some outstanding some open permits, like close that down now, because it will cost you way more on the back end, and that was definitely something I wasn't thinking about when I was
for sure. Yeah, and while some of this is very specific to New York, I think every area has its own quirks, right? Every market has its own quirks about what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do with your physical establishment. So I think make sure you know your local laws, and even if it's not a PCE where you live, make sure you know what actually does apply to your space. So I think this category is really all encompassing when it comes to consistency about revenue and contracts. I think it's really critical because it does show that that you have a process in place, that you have an operating system that actually works, and a business model that's been proven consistently over time. So I think this is a really, really important driver. This is your driver number 2, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Love it.
And the
Anything
third
else
one,
for that
staff.
one?
No.
Staff is number
Those are,
three.
if you do all those are like the little ones that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's the one you're most likely to kind of skip over in your mind.
Totally.
But that's the one that's very, very easy. The churn, not necessarily, but some of those things are pretty easy to fix if you think about it a little ahead of time. So those are all my landmines that you want to avoid stepping
I
on.
love it. It's a great list. I hope our listeners have been taking notes. That's a lot of good shit. Number three, the driver number three is staff. So what matters here?
The main one, which we already talked about, is your operator,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you have a good operator, everything downstream kind of takes care of itself. And the tip I give is, think like a prospective buyer. So I run a podcast called Gym World Worldwide, where we talk to a lot of people who have sold, a lot of multi-facility owners, a lot of the most successful unicorns. And so whenever we talk to someone running a multi-location play and we ask them, what is the most difficult part of it? Everything, almost unanimously, they say, getting a good operator in place. And so, to get bought by a strategic buyer, which is someone who's expanding locations, having a good operator in place just really removes the biggest domino for them, and makes everything so much easier. And
Yeah.
so, if you're thinking like a prospective buyer, the things you want to ask yourself is, like if I was buying Mark Fisher Fitness, there's the Mark Fisher risk, but the next thing I want to find out who's running the place. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
find out, are they making a fair or above market wage? Are they tied to the upside of the business, or are they just going to leave and take all the members with them? Do they require little oversight, or am I going to have to, fly up to New York and deal with toilets
Yeah.
and then other personnel? Can they hire, fire, manage people, right? Which is the
Yep.
worst part of operating a business, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then
No one wants to buy a headache.
no. And so having someone there and feeling confident that they will continue to be there over the course of the time they plan to run the business makes life so much easier.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I think the having the people in place is really key. At the end of the day, we are a people business. That's what people are buying, is the relationships and experiences they have with our staff. And if you have people in place that are competent and committed to staying through the transition of ownership and are incentivized to stay and continue making it work. And I think I love that you add in there that also have the power and ability to hire and fire and manage people without needing ownership intervention. I think those are all really pretty key, because no one wants to buy a place and have to do any of that shit. Which is
No,
amazing. Yeah.
I mean, if
Yeah.
they do, they're running what's called like a turnaround. And if your
Sure.
gym is a turnaround, you're not going to get anything for your business.
Sure.
If someone's buying your business because they think you're an idiot and can run your business better, that's going to be reflected in the price.
100%. Yeah. So that staff was a third driver. I think you had one more. There was 4 drivers. Yeah.
Yes, systems.
Mm-hmm.
And all the unicorns probably have impeccable systems written down and
Yeah.
operated
Our audience
the
is
same
sick
way
of
every
us
single
hearing
time.
this word.
Yeah. And so, good businesses have good systems, right? And good businesses sell more than bad businesses. And there's really 4 that I think you should really have nailed down. And so it's, getting nurturing leads, selling and on-ramping your new members, hiring, firing, managing staff, and then internal and external comms. And internal comms is how you talk to staff and how you talk to existing customers. External is just your marketing out into the world.
Yeah. I think it's a really smart list, John. Honestly, I mean, not surprised, but it's a really smart list to think about, like the major systems you have to have in place if you're going to sell. And I think you're right. You need a steady flow of leads and way to sell them and track them and convert them. You need a steady process for your creating your client experience and onboarding them, especially the first 90 days is what we often talk about. And then obviously communication internally is huge. How you talk to them, the pulse at which you talk to your people internally and externally really helps drive those other 2 things. So I think
And it's
that's
not only like written down, it's executed like it's written down.
It's executed
so I'm
well.
sure,
Yep.
you guys make people write down their, standard operating procedures.
Yeah.
But, if they've been in the group 2-3 years and you go back and look at them, probably doesn't reflect the way the business is being operated now. So don't let those get like old and crusty. It's easy
Yeah.
enough to spend, a couple hours every 3 months making sure that all the procedures reflect what's actually happening in the gym, and it goes a long way to making your life easier, much less in prospective buyers one.
Yeah, that's exactly it, John. And we always talk about SOPs, that every SOP has to be a loop, right? It has to circle back and improve itself once your thinking and action improve. It also has to maintain its own quality control, right? If your SOP is about how to deliver a badass training session in your gym, then who's making sure that everyone is actually doing that on a regular basis? So SOPs have to always kind of be a loop and circle back and be able to improve themselves, which people often miss. They think just writing down expectations once and training people once is enough. But if I'm going to go buy a gym, I want to make sure that those systems are in place and continuously being used, and those standards are being met on a regular basis, not just that there's some, dusty folder sitting somewhere in a file cabinet. I don't think people use file cabinets anymore, but,
Dating
not helping
yourself,
anyone.
Michael.
I know I do it, but it's okay. I have a file cabinet next to my desk. There's papers in there, So, okay, we covered a lot of ground already. I'll start to wrap this up, but one last question. So we've covered, when to buy a gym, what the process is. You gave a 3-step process, which I think was fantastic. We talked about the 4 drivers that drive valuation and your formula for net owner benefit. The thing I think my final question for you is, what about communicating this process to stakeholders? What are your thoughts on communicating, how and when you communicate to your team about a transaction like this, and how when you communicate to your clients about a transaction like this?
So if you follow the 3-step process on the front end, you've already had a conversation with your operator, right? Because you should be away from your gym. You shouldn't be going in there.
It's not a surprise to your team. They've already seen that in action. Yeah.
Right. So if you've done this correctly, you've been missing already. So nobody's, quote unquote, missing you.
Yep.
And so the third piece that, we've talked about how to think about value, how to get ready for a sale. The third piece is who's actually buying it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's 3 types of buyers. There's a staff member, there's a rich member, and there's a strategic buyer. So most likely like another gym owner. And so how you approach that conversation really depends on you and who you plan to sell to. So I recommend everyone engineers an exit plan. So, in their mind, what a perfect exit would look like. Who's buying it? What's the price? What is the business run by? What's important? Do you want to get the highest dollar amount, or do you want to make sure that your staff is taken care of, and the culture is maintained and the members don't get 30 price increases or something along those lines? And what the result of that exercise looks like will determine the conversation you have with staff, because for a lot of people, they want to sell to a staff member.
Yep.
And so if that is the case, when you disappear to build your side hustle, that's a conversation you have. You plant those little Easter eggs that maybe one day you will own this gym if you want to be. If that's not, if you want to sell to a strategic, or you plan to sell to a strategic, I think the most important thing at the operator level is making them feel like they are a critical part of the deal. Like, hey, you're it. You're a lot of the value. And so that's why when we're going back to the think like an owner section, you want to make sure that they're paid fair, above market wage, and have some type of tie to the upside of the business. So they feel important and they want to stick around. They don't feel like they're getting the raw end of the deal here. And so my general, I wouldn't talk to all your coaches or front desk people until the money was in the bank account. I would probably be a lot more inclined to just have it be on a more need to know basis until you're a little closer to the finish line.
Sure.
And then there's plenty of ways to just be honest and forthright.
Yeah.
But
well, as you're talking, John.
Missing,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
If you're missing, then exactly. Then people already
no one's
know
missing
that,
you, right?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think, the thing that's running through my head as you share all these strategies is all of these are intended to have people avoid being surprised, right? Because I think that's the thing that puts people off the most, right? Is that I had no idea this was coming. There were no signs. I was out of the loop. I felt like, but all these things are planting seeds. You not being there, you starting to talk to employees in advance about possibly buying, and right, all of these things mean when the news finally comes, most people shouldn't be shocked. There should be some, some breadcrumbs along that trail they could have noticed before. I think that's really useful because I think people feeling, especially team members, less for clients, but team members feeling like, wait, all this was happening behind my back. What else are people talking about that I don't know, right? And that's not a seed we want to plant, right? So anything you can do to kind of grease the wheels, so when the transaction finally happens, people aren't really taken aback. I think that's really critical. I think it's really critical. Yeah.
And I'm of the steps, that's probably where I'm weakest. You are
Mm.
the human expert, so I would defer to you on creating the communication plan. I'd probably
Yeah.
call you
Great.
and figure it out.
Great.
So if you're a unicorn, just call Michael and
Just call
have
me.
him tell you what
We
to
can
say.
walk through it. We can walk through it.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap it up because this has been incredibly helpful, John. I so appreciate it. I know every time I have you on this podcast, you're going to give, 120% value. And you certainly did on today's episode. I think for anyone out there thinking about maybe even selling someday or even not selling, just want to tighten up the reins of their business, I think everything you offer today, I think is such a value add for them. So thank you. Thank you. Anything going on in Kilo land or anything you want our listeners to know about what's happening in Kilo right now?
Hey, if you need more leads, give us a call. And if you
Yeah.
want an easier gym management solution, we're happy to run you through a demo. We're building features specifically for unicorns. I don't want to talk about them publicly yet because Cleta will get very mad at me, who's the CEO of Kilo. But we're thinking about the small group training space, semi-private training space a lot, and I think you guys are going to like some of the things we're building for you.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited. Well, thanks as always as being on the podcast, and listeners, if you want more John or Kilo in your life, go click the links down below in the show notes, and I'm sure I'll have you back again soon, my friend. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.